The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
Good evening or good morning, depending on when you're watching. This is Joe Doolittle, and this is Story by Story, sharing the human experience. And we're a storytelling program, and my producing partner, Kate Dudding, is not available for this show, so you just have me and a wonderful guest who I'll tell you about a little later. But right now, I just want to kind of touch base on what our aim is. I'm a member of the Story Circle of the Capital District, and there's a group of folks in the area, about 60 of us, who are storytellers and story listeners. And we like the idea of what story does to life and to the way people learn and live in community. And we like to share that. And that's the first purpose of this show. We hope you'll be entertained. We hope you learn things. And for those of you who might be encouraged to be a storyteller, we hope to meet you live at one of our Story Circle gatherings or performances. And we'll touch base on those early on. Fall, the autumn, is a great time for stories and cider donuts and cider and spiced things and pumpkin pie and all that goes with it. And all those things get woven around stories. And we run a number of productions, and we're really pleased that we started a new wordplay up in Salem, New York, at the Fort Salem Theater. And we'll talk more about our November celebration coming up there. But it's an opportunity to extend ourselves from our regular venues here in Schenectady, at Proctor's Theater, at the Glenn Sanders Mansion, and at various libraries around the Capital District. So keep that in mind if you're up north or traveling, because it's a great place to listen to stories. It's a cabaret style. We've also shared stories up in the mountains and the hillsides. And today we've had a guest teller, a member of our Story Circle, who doesn't live in the Albany area. She came down Route 20, through the rain, through probably a little fog, to get with us, to be here this morning. And her name is Claire Beetlestone. And I'm going to welcome Claire, and I'm going to talk a little bit about you, because I've had the good fortune to know you over the years as a storyteller. But Claire is widely traveled. She's lived and taught and worked in Africa. She was encouraged by her African experience to go to medical school. You became a specialist. You're a radiologist and still doing some radiological work professionally. And she'll talk a little bit about, because Claire, with this background, it seems to me that you encountered storytelling several different times in your life, whether it was growing up as a kid in Philadelphia,
yes,
or along the way. And it hooked you several different times, the idea of story. When did storytelling hook you?
Storytelling hooked me of late.
Of late? Of late.
But as a child, I always told my friends things to amaze them.
Things to amaze them?
Yes.
Well, you certainly can be amazing. I know that about you.
And as I was growing up in my grandfather's house, he always had meetings of people from the Board of Education of Philadelphia. And these people would strategize and debate over very formal dinner parties. And at the end, they'd tell each other stories. I always listened in. And then I went over to West Africa. And their storytelling is part of the West African tradition. Everyone tells stories all the time to inform, to educate, to pass on the mores of the culture. And we were a new university. We were a branch of the University of London, and we were starting anew, had people from all over the world as staff. And the easiest way for us to relate is by telling one another stories. So then I came to this country, and I was introduced to the teen psych unit was a friend of the psychiatrist there, and he said, "Claire, I want you to tell stories to these children." And I said, "What shall I tell them?" And he said, "You take a few meals with them, and you'll know." I took a few meals with them and found out that, one, they didn't know anything about the traditional American tales, and they were largely amoral. Amoral. No direction. They hadn't grown up with story. They hadn't grown up with the guidance that story gives us. So, I encountered storytelling. And I had sessions periodically, and these were educative, but they were also healing. And that is the sort of story I tend to tell.
Educational, but also healing.
Yes.
So the concept of the story, of the moral infrastructure that story can provide for families and for literally for cultures.
Yes.
But the kids in this behavioral health unit were lacking that. They hadn't really encountered it either in their families or their culture.
Your heart would break at what you heard.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. By and large, they came from very dysfunctional situations, let's put it that way.
So in your experience, stories can kind of take care of people?
I think so.
Yeah.
And as a physician, I am aware that over 90% of healing is not physical. It's psychological.
So true. There's a basic tenet. One of our storytelling friends, Kent Bushman, always ends his emails and things, "Walk in balance."
Yes.
And that idea of being in balance is being healed, I think, to some extent. And many cultures have that concept of being in balance, whether they call it shalom, like the Hebrews, the Jews. Many Native American societies find places that are particularly spiritual, and they often describe them as being in balance. That's the way they describe it. So that's really interesting. And now, so you grew up in the States, but then you went to West Africa, and then you went to England, because I know you talk about being at home in Cooperstown and being at home in Scotland.
I trained in Scotland. I trained at Glasgow Royal Infirmary, and in the process, I bought a house over there.
Okay.
And then I went back to West Africa, have also been in South Africa, have also been over in Sri Lanka,
Wow.
all over Europe, and all over the States. So I have traveled very widely, and I do like story. But mainly when I travel, I listen. And the listening is the most important part. This is when you get the stories, but you also get the cadence and the style of the people. I learned this particularly when I was traveling in Central Asia, post-Soviet times. Learned a lot of old culture there.
Wow.
Language barrier, but I had a translator.
Now, with that kind of segue, it's almost time, I think, to have you share a few stories. And so this is the important part. You heard Claire say that this was the important part, the listening part. So we're going to listen to a couple of short stories, and then we'll reflect together on them, and we'll probably hear even more in the echo. Claire Beetlestone.
All right. I always start with a riddle, because in the African tradition, all storytelling must start with a riddle, because it puts people in the right frame of mind. It gets them alert and questioning. And I do not tell stories to send people to sleep. I tell stories to wake them up. So here is your first riddle story. In Kyoto, there is an ancient temple called Kiyomizu. And at this temple, 3 springs come out of the living rock. If you drink from one spring, eternal life or long life is promised. If you drink from a second stream, wealth is promised. If you drink from the third, love is promised. Which of the three would you take a drink from?
Wealth, love, or a long life?
Yes.
Do I have to tell you now?
Yes, you do.
I take love, I think.
Good. Now, but something else has happened. There's been an earth tremor, and a fourth fountain has sprung out. And the priest of the temple tells us that a drink from this fountain will assure wisdom, but you have to take only one of the fountains, and then you renounce all of the other blessings. So one bestows long life, one bestows riches, and one bestows love, and one bestows wisdom. Which of these four would you select and renounce all of the others? I won't put you on the spot, but this is the point where story comes in.
Oh.
We can write a story about each of these situations, living without each of the blessings. And there you have a whole cycle of stories. All right. Now, my first story is a story that I tell to the kids to keep them quiet. They're not used to keeping quiet, and I'm not quite a television. So they treat me as a television. They eat popcorn, they talk, etc., etc., etc. I don't like it. So I tell them this story. And this is Ronald Leventhal's interpretation of this story. It's called The Cricket. I was in New York with my friend, and we were walking along one of the busiest streets. I mean, you could hear the screech of tires. You could hear people shuffling of feet. There were honks. There were all sorts of noises. And she says to me, I hear a cricket. You hear a cricket? No way in this noisy place. Anyway, I've never seen a cricket in New York. No. Wait, I hear a cricket. And she said, wait a minute, I'll show you. And she took me across the street to this giant concrete platter, and in it was a tree. And amongst the leaves, she showed me a cricket. And I said, no way. Your hearing must be extraordinary. How could you hear this? And she said, it's easy. It depends on what you're listening for. So she reached into her pocket and brought out a handful of change, and she threw it on the street. And every head from 20 feet around turned to see where the sound of money was coming from.
Ooh.
See, she said, it depends on what you're listening for. There's my New York story.
Wow. Wow.
Try it.
So we've got the story of the blessing beyond love, wisdom. We have the story of the cricket. And in between those is the ham and the sandwich. We had, I can't remember. No? Okay.
It's just to calm the audience. One, to get them in a way of thinking, get their minds working. The second is to be quiet and listen to me.
So that we build curiosity with your introduction.
Mm-hmm.
And then you build attention with the second little story.
Mm-hmm.
And they each have a lot of possibilities in terms of where the listener by this time is already headed.
Yes.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Okay.
Now, I want to tell you, I'm telling these stories to young people who have had something bad happen in their lives, all right? They're in the teen psych unit because they're really too young to be put into jail, all right? And recently someone told me, no, before I say that, I'm going to dedicate the story to him. It's called The Crack Pot. And it's a story to repair and build self-esteem. It's an Indian story. There was a man who was a water bearer. And every day he would go down to the river and fill 2 jars, put them on a yoke on his shoulders, and walk high up into the hill to his master's house. One pot was perfect and delivered a full pot of water each time, but the other had a crack in it. And as he went up this long trail to the house, the water leaked out. After many, many years, the cracked pot, full of misery, said to him, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And the water bearer said, "Sorry for what?" And he said, I'm so sorry. Every time you come up, I deliver only half my load because of my crack. And I've made you work doubly hard. I'm so sorry about this." The water bearer laughed and he said, "Look," he said, "see the side on which you leak? There are flowers, beautiful flowers, all colors, all shapes, thickly along there. And on the perfect pot side, there are no flowers. You have given us beauty." Now, I told someone that every time I told that story, I dedicate it to him. And this is someone who for many years had been an alcoholic and cured himself. And he said to me, "Claire, I am damaged goods." And I said, "You're not damaged goods, because this is living proof of what happens in those situations." Okay.
So your example on this story is story as a way of describing the benefit of an imperfection.
Yes.
The ability to be something when you're broken. The ability to be a performer or a contributor when you really don't think that you are. And so it's an important aspect of healing, because it's apt for adults as well as kids, particularly since in a way we're all cracked to some extent. I don't know about you, but I know about me.
Yes.
So that the nature of the story, if you tell it, if you tell it to those kids on the unit or to folks in another setting, do people want to talk about it after you finish that story?
No, not really.
Is that right?
I find with my stories, there is not much discussion afterwards. You take these stories and you think of them and you hold them in your heart, and they come again and again. It's not something that's readily captured. And this is the sort of story I like to tell. There's a little bit of mystery in it. In a way, the story isn't complete. You've got to take the story and think about it and complete it yourself.
Do you ever hear from people who have told the story to somebody else and then they relate that they told your story?
Oh, yes. I tell a lot in the school system, and always I say at the end of my storytelling session, "Well, today I have told you lots of stories and lots of things, and if you don't tell stories, they'll die, they'll wither. So it's up to you to take at least one of these stories and tell them to someone else. And if you can't remember it completely, just tell a little bit of it, or tell a little bit of it and make up the rest." That's my envoi. Well, I was in the hardware store in the line, and a little girl said, "Ow, you're Dr. Beetlestone. You told us stories last year." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "And you told us the story about," and verbatim, she repeated my story. This girl must have been 8 years old.
Wow.
It was wonderful.
Well, there you go. And you give them license to adapt the story.
Yes, oh yes.
Well, that's even better, because the issue of a story teaching us, if we repeat the story and tweak it a little bit, then it becomes more our story than your story. And I think that's a very important instruction, permission, encouragement to give to listeners.
Yes.
Because we're so often focused on being perfect and repeating things verbatim and not just telling the story. So that's really good.
No, this is an important point because I think all stories change with time. Everything changes. The laws of thermodynamics. Everything is always in change. And every time we tell a story, it differs. If I told the same story to you tomorrow, it would be entirely different, or just a tad different. And over time, these stories change. The example being En Famille, when my daughter is writing her memoirs. Okay? And she sent me the first copy. She said, Mommy, if you have anything to add or change, let me know. So, of course, I let her know. I said, that's not how it was at all. She said, well, that's how I see it. And I said, no, I see it this way. Well, ask the others. And the whole family goes into chaos. Everyone has a different story for that situation. So we decided we will each write our story about a given incident and see what we get.
That's something we can stay tuned for, all right? Is that going to happen like at Thanksgiving or Christmas? You're going to come around?
It's going to happen at Thanksgiving and Christmas,
oh,
yes.
Wow.
It always does.
Wow, that's stuffing all. That's stuffing all for sure, I'll tell you, right there.
There are arguments.
There are. I can't imagine a family having an argument. I just can't imagine that. The thing about your daughter's memoirs, now, you've got family, but you had family in this gathering of places that you lived. So you were always like
we always
Dr.
come together.
But you're also mom and everything like
yes.
that too.
We always come together wherever we are, wherever in the world.
Yeah.
I think in this gathering we're going to have someone from France and someone from Hungary and someone from South Africa,
wow.
at least.
Wow. That describes kind of
yes.
from all over.
Yes.
That's really wonderful. That's really wonderful. And there are other storytellers in your family, it sounds like, if your daughter's writing her memoirs.
She is really the quintessential storyteller. When we were doing work on the house or work in the garden, she would be reading or thinking. Can you imagine the resentment from the other kids?
Ooh.
Why is she sitting there? She said, no. I'm gathering information. I'm gathering information for story. And I think it's now that we have to make her produce.
So
for all the time she was lying in the meadow reading and we were painting the house. Now let's pay back
these
time.
are the fruits of her labor, so to speak.
Yes,
that she's
yes.
darn well going to share them.
Yes.
Got it.
Another thing about that family that's interesting, when an unsuspecting person came to their table for dinner, that person would be sent upstairs to the girls and said, now, the girls are ready for bed, they're in bed, you tell the girls something about your childhood that they would enjoy. These people aren't storytellers, they're normal people, but they got into that and enjoyed it thoroughly.
Oh, that's
And so
fun.
did my granddaughters.
Oh, that is
Yes,
fun.
yes.
That is fun.
Every family can do this.
That's right. Wow, some good ideas here. Because the idea of stories is to entertain and to teach at its most basic. But what we've just spent some time with is the idea of story as a healing mechanism, as a connection. And you use the term that, amoral, about life's balances, about creating structure in the way we regard situations, the listing for the cricket rather than the money, the nature of the cracked pot. These are important elements, and in many ways we don't deal with them in other audible exchanges with people, whether it's a joke. Perhaps poetry is the only other place where you kind of weave the meanings together the way story does. And song to a degree, but song captures us in another part of our imagination, I think. We could have that discussion sometimes. I might pause and do a little commercial message, and then we'll come back to you, Claire. Storytelling is alive and well in the Capital District. And Story Circle at Proctor's is a resident company that focuses on storytelling programs and promotions. Story Circle of the Capital District is a guild, and the dues to the guild are $10, so it's not like it's an exclusive group. Well, we are an exclusive group, but if you go to our website, Story Circle at Proctor's, you can hit some very interesting things. One, there's a YouTube link, and guest tellers from the show are edited down, and just their stories are there. So if you're looking for a story, or TV is dull, other TV is dull, I know this isn't dull, but you can go there and just pick up on that. So Claire's stories will be there in about a week. And I'd like to just talk about some of the live opportunities that we have here. This Sunday, the first Sunday of the month, November 2nd, we have one of our dinner series programs at the Glenn Sanders Mansion. Story Sundays at the Glenn Sanders features Motoko and Eshu Bumpus, and stories to nourish your soul. And Motoko is a Japanese American. She was trained also as a mime. She uses mime and story to bring traditional Japanese and American stories to life. And Eshu is a wonderful personality with one of the best baritone voices I've ever heard. He's done jazz in New York, he's done jazz in Boston, he's done a lot of social work in the Connecticut Valley, and it's just going to be a wonderfully infectious, that's a good infectious evening. We encourage you to do that. We've started a venue in Schenectady's historic stockade at Arthur's Market. Arthur's has been a market since 1797. It's now more of a coffee house and a place for great fellowship and light fare. And we have an open mic first Tuesdays, and stuff. And we have a featured teller, Mary Murphy, who's from Albany. And she does some wonderful family and some wonderful Irish stories. She'll tell for about a half an hour. If you want to come and tell a story or play the guitar or sing or do something, read poetry, you're more than welcome. And it's a great place for fellowship. We usually draw 30 to 40 people, and it's just wonderful. And you can look out at Lawrence the Indian and see the stockade stuff right there. It's really historical. We have a program called Bridging the Divide up at the new program I mentioned in Fort Salem. That's coming up on the 9th of November. It's a great lineup of local, what I would have to say, North Country storytellers. And one of our old friends, Tom Weekly, who is from Arlington, Vermont, is coming out of retirement to tell a telebration. So I encourage you to come over there and hear that. We have an open mic at Cafe Lena in Saratoga on November 12th. And Marnie Gillard, who is an old friend of storytelling here in the Capital District, and a wonderful, wonderful raconteur of family and Gaelic stories, will be the featured teller there. Again, there's sign up and opportunities for you to tell as well as listen. Our own Telebration, a time when storytellers all around the world gather to tell stories, will be at Proctor's on the 16th of November, Sunday at 2 o'clock. And that's a great opportunity because the Green Market will be back indoors at Proctor's, and you can come and shop and graze the Green Market. There's some wonderful restaurants who follow the Green Market right in. And then at 2 o'clock, you can come to Telebration. And we've got a lineup of wonderful tellers talking about situations where the story helps bridge the divide in situations. And some of them are folk stories, some of them are historical stories, some will be hysterical, and some will be just regular stories. But it's a great time, and that's a great opportunity for you to bring a group to storytelling, because the group rate's really pretty good, and we have intermission with munchies. It's just a great time, so hope to see you there. If you're interested in just sitting around with a group of storytellers and listening or telling for the first time, we meet here at the Colonie Library on Tuesday, November 18th. And it's at 6:30 to 8:30. We have a great time together. It's pretty open. So if you're curious about storytelling, we'd love to see you. We'd really love to see you there. Come on over and connect. And again, if you want to get a little bit of storytelling, our website, storycircle@proctors.org, is there. Please check out those YouTubes. They're really wonderful. They're really wonderful. And now we're back to Story by Story. Claire, I'm wondering if we could pause for a minute. When you think back on being able to kind of use story in the various situations that you found. I know when you drive up to your farmhouse, you see the Stop the Fracking signs, and I know you're active in a number of issues of social justice. Is there a memorable time when being able to be a storyteller made a difference to you? Is that a good question? I don't think I've ever asked that question.
Interesting question. Because I was at a summer camp for adults, and I said, okay, what we need to do is tell our life story. And I used Joe Campbell's The Hero's Journey.
Okay.
And there were 10 women that joined in this group. And I heard such amazing, heartwarming, heart-rending things that were just so vital to talk about. And afterwards they said, you know, we've never really iterated these before. We've never really said those things. We've never really put them in words before. And it's a pattern of our whole lives. So the next time I did this was, in fact, a few weeks ago. And what I do is, in effect, a life review. Life review is when you're dying and your whole life goes before your eyes. So I call this Light Review Light.
Life Review Light.
So I get people to review their lives with one focus of one change in their lives, which was important. That is away from their family, very different from their family, that they've learned and they've taken back to the world. And that's the template we used. And again, I get wonderful results doing this.
That they've learned and taken back to the world. That's a
yes,
great line.
They've learned and taken back to the world. They've learned in their quest.
Now, I think we've just had a pretty good example of the power of being a storyteller and the lesson that it teaches. Because I asked you about places where your ability as a storyteller made a difference. And you talked about places where you would listen to people. And, you know, earlier when you said, well, I was in Central Asia and I learned a lot by listening, and everybody said, yeah, right. But the ability to frame listening, make it safe, is part of the method of storytelling. And when I asked the question, I didn't know what I was going to hear. But I honestly have to say that was very profound, because it's the nature of what it means to be a good friend, what it means to be a good counselor, pastor, teacher, storyteller. Really, that was wonderful. That was wonderful. Wonderful.
Central Asia, I've had to tell stories. I have to explain myself. People just stop at their tracks and say, who are you?
Who are you?
Where are you from?
And when you say you're an American, did that just kind of blow their mind?
Well, yes, it does.
Oh, really?
My best example was on the Sahara Desert. I'm in one of these markets, that come together with the camels and everything. And this guy, he looks like something out of the Bible. He's got the long beard and the striped cloth, and he's selling frankincense. And he says, "Oh, he wants to speak to me. I want to speak to him. He's beautiful." But we had to go through about 10 people before we found a language in common. And he says, "You're from New York." What? And I said, "Yes, where are you from?"
Even without Ronald Leaventhal's accent, he recognized you?
We were in the middle of the Sahara in a place called Ngal, where there's a market that meets periodically. People come out of the desert with their camels, etc., and meet there. And he says, "You're from New York." It's beautiful. And he's pre-biblical.
Did you? Now we're all curious. I wouldn't pick you as being from New York or Philadelphia when I look at you, but he did. And
Okay, I had a pair of tight jeans and a knife in my belt.
okay,
I was younger.
you were younger. I see. Well, at the same time, I don't know how to tell that story. If I repeat that story, I would probably tell the story about the time that Claire got hit on by the wise guy in the souk or something like that.
Oh no, it wasn't like that at all.
Okay.
Oh no, not at all like that.
Give us another story if you're ready.
Yes, I have some. And okay, I want to tell the story of the closed chest because it's a story used to counsel adults who are having marital problems.
Oh.
Okay? Murray Bay was a very distinguished, wise, and learned gentleman. He had married a wife much younger than he. One day he chanced to come home earlier than expected, and his old servant ran up to him and said, "Your wife, our mistress, is in our apartments, and there's a large chest there with her. It should only contain a few old laces that belonged to your grandmother, but I believe it contains much more. She has refused to let me, your most trusted retainer, open it." Murray Bay goes to his wife's apartment, and there she is sitting in front of the chest, looking a little bit worried in mind. He said, "May I open the chest?" And she says, "Why? Because you don't trust me or because of suspicions of a servant?" He said, "Can we not do this without talking about the undertones?" She said, "No, we certainly cannot." He says, "Is it locked?" And she said, "Yes, it is. Here's the key. I will give it to you if you dismiss the servant." The servant is dismissed. The key is handed over to Murray Bay, and his wife departs a little bit troubled in mind. Murray Bay sits by the chest for a long time. And finally, he gets 4 strong men to shake the chest and carry it to the furthest part of the garden and dig a deep hole and put it in. Nothing more was ever said about the incident. That's the story.
That's the story.
That's the story.
And so he didn't fire the servant. He just dismissed the servant from the...
He was the oldest retainer.
Right,
he had been there in the family for years,
So if you were in counseling and the therapist told this story, this parable, then the conversation that would get precipitated is around the respective chests that we bring into situations and relationships.
Yes. And there are European stories about the woman who was a fish, really. And she told her husband periodically, "I will go into my chambers, do not disturb me." And there she was being a fish. And that was fine. They had a good relationship until he blundered in one day into her fishness, and that was the end of the relationship. I mean, women keep certain things. Maybe women are the repository of the soul, and there's certain things that should not be asked or discovered with women. They have their secrets. The relationship of Murray Bay and his wife went on for many years, for many happy years. What if the chest had been opened? And there's always the undertone there. It is big enough to hold a man. We don't really know if it held a man or what, do we?
No, we don't. Although the thought had crossed my mind.
Well, yes.
And I bet it crossed Murray Bay's mind too.
Poor Murray Bay. He was much older than she. Sorry.
And yet the relationships here are timeless. Murray Bay and the setting in Arabia, wherever Murray Bay was, even that is just a simple reference for this relationship.
Yes.
And we have the ability to kind of get involved in it wherever we start the story from. Because there are times where we've been the gossipy servant. There are times we've been Murray Bay, where times we've been the wife. And it's a very interesting place to take off from.
What you said was very interesting, because when we tell stories, when we're learning the story, we take each character in turn and we live each character. Besides which, something you said was fascinating. It could have been any place in the world. And that slipped me over to realizing that stories are all the same in the world. When I first started to tell, I was friends with a gentleman from Russia who painted icons. And he sort of listened to my becoming a storyteller, and he said, Claire, he said, you know, there are only 20 stories in the world.
Only 20.
And you have to go find them. You know, he was right. Wherever you go in the world, there's the equivalent to a story that you yourself tell. It's fascinating.
That's a fascinating point in terms of maybe the wisdom fountain back to your beginning, because to recognize the common themes, and you've touched on a few things. The Joseph Campbell book, A Hero with a Thousand Faces, is a wonderful reference on the universality of kinds of stories in various culture. And I'd like to think that we don't use that universal reference enough in dealing with Palestinian Israelis and Russians and Americans, because the references do become common ground because it's very similar. Just as a point for carrying forward something that's demonstrated its power. I mean, have you got another one?
Oh, I've got many more.
Oh, well, play on.
Okay, here
Tell
we
on.
go.
Give us excess of it.
No, I tell this because I think we all need this at the moment. The story is Indonesian, but it happens in Mecca. Every year in Mecca, cholera, death, and fear appear during the Hajj. Now, on this particular occasion, fear went before cholera and death, and the gatekeeper, not knowing fear, let fear in. But when cholera and death came, the gatekeeper said, "Cholera, how many will you take this year?" And cholera said, "Approximately 500. And the gatekeeper said, "Go in." And death, he said, "How many will you take this year?" And death said, "I will take whatever cholera sends me." The gatekeeper said, "Go in." And after a few weeks' time, they were ready to go out. And they asked the gatekeeper to open the gates. And the gatekeeper said, "First, tell me, cholera, how many have you taken this year?" And cholera said, "Only 499. And death, how many have you taken this year? 2,000. 2,000. You promised that you'd take only what Cholera sent you. He said, but fear was there before me. And fear kills more than cholera or death can.
Whoa. Whoa.
So there.
Now, and the story, that comes out of the Muslim tradition, because
Yes.
it takes place at the Hajj, and it deals with kind of the nature, we would call it the three horses of the apocalypse, but in terms of kind of things. So that there's a root in many faiths, but its simplicity is the nature of the emotion, the psychology, rather than the illness and the germ. Wow, isn't that something?
See, fear is looking into the future. If you turn and face your fear and go there, it no longer becomes fear. It's a job to be done.
Oh. You could do a whole lot on that.
Aye.
You could do a whole lot on that. Wow.
Oh, I've got another one. Do you have time?
We have, by all means.
Okay, now this is a story of Paulo Coelho, who is one of my favorite writers.
Paulo Coelho is a Spanish writer?
He's South American.
South American.
He's Brazilian. And he's magnificent. Well, this story is called Oil in the Spoon. A very rich merchant told his son, "You must learn the secret of happiness. I'm going to tell you to go into the desert and find an old sage there. He can help teach you the secret of happiness." So the boy went to the desert, and he traveled 40 days and 40 nights, and not finding a little hovel there and an anchorite, he found a magnificent castle. And he went in, and there was the wise man. The wise man wasn't, as I say, an anchorite. He was a prince. And in this castle, all sorts of things were going on. There were a whole bunch of merchants coming and going, and there were people in corners having conversations, animated conversations and discussions. And on the table, there was the most beautiful food, all the most choice food of that region of the world. And there was a small orchestra playing. Well, there was a long queue there to see the wise man, and he had to wait 2 hours before he came to the wise man. And the wise man listened to him very, very carefully and said, "Young man," he said, "I really am very busy, and I don't have much time to tell you the secret of happiness yet. But what I would ask you to do is go around this place and look at my home." And he said, "Would you do me a favor?" And the boy said, "Yes. I will give you this spoon in which 2 tiny drops of oil have been put. Take this spoon with you and don't spill the oil." Mind you, you don't spill the oil. So the young man went up and down the steps of the castle. He went around and around the castle gardens, and after 2 hours, he came back to the wise man. And the wise man said, "Well, what did you see?" And the boy said, "Well, not very much, because I was paying attention to keeping the drops of oil on the spoon." The wise man said, No. You go around again, and you look at everything. You look at my beautiful Persian tapestries. You look at the beautiful scrolls in my library. You look at the stained glass. You look at everything in that garden. The gardener has been working on that for 10 years. Enjoy it, savor it. So the boy starts out with the spoon with the oil in it. And he does see the wonders of this place. And it is beautiful. The stonework must have been carried for miles and miles. The plants were from every place in the world. And the fountains in this garden were intriguing. It was so gorgeous. And he came back to the man with his eyes shining, and a man says, "You must know a man's home. before you know him, before you trust him, what did you see? And the boy described the wonders, and the wise man said, and where is the oil in the spoon? The boy said, I was so intent on looking at things, I must have spilt the oil somewhere. Ah, said the wise man, what I can tell you now is to achieve true happiness, you must see all of the wonders of the world, but never forget the drops of oil in the spoon.
So it's possible to do it all. Is that the nature of the story?
You have to be very, very careful and very attentive. Live and savor each moment.
Wow. That's a wonderful story. Now, where did that come from?
There's a writer called Paulo Coelho, Coelo, and his stuff is all online, and he wants everyone to tell it.
Oh, really?
Yes.
So if you Google Paulo.
Paulo, Paolo, Coelo. Beautiful, wise stuff.
Great. Thank
Yes,
you for that.
yes.
And for those of you who may not be familiar, the other reference is Joseph Campbell, and the work is Hero of a Thousand Faces. And there's a great interview with Joseph Campbell and, cannot remember the name of the great public broadcaster.
It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Joseph Campbell is, in a way, mentor to all of us storytellers. Do you want one more?
I want one more. We have time. Sure.
Okay. Now, I love to tell stories like this. I love stories like this because I love the mystery in them. And this is what living in North Africa and Asia has done for me. Okay. Now, two companions are hiking in the mountains. And all of a sudden, a summer storm comes. It's very fierce. And they seek shelter in a ruined temple. And it's ruined. There's devastation all around. But on one wall is a picture. And this picture is nicely framed. And in it is a village and a fountain and a tree near the fountain. And beside the fountain is a most beautiful girl. She has long, black, springy hair that covers her like a shawl, and one of the hikers becomes absolutely enchanted with this picture. And in a large clap of thunder, he's in the picture. He's in the village. He's beside the girl. Well, time takes its course, and he marries the girl. And he is so happy, but her friends say, look, you are a married woman now. That hair, that beautiful hair, you have to pin it up. It's inappropriate to have your hair that way. So she pins up her hair. And the couple lives in bliss. But all of a sudden she comes to him and said, look, the Tsar's men have come and they're conscripting. You must run and hide as fast as you can. So he runs and loses himself in the labyrinth of these walled streets and trips and falls into darkness. And then he's back again with his friend who had been looking for him. They look at each other and they go to the picture and they look at the picture. It's the same. There's the fountain, and there's the tree over the fountain, and the beautiful girl standing next to the fountain. But her hair is nicely pinned up, as befits a married woman.
Oh. Now, Claire.
That's
Claire,
one of my favorite stories.
It's one of those. It's just one of those. It's one of those stories that just kind of leaves you there. It's like your riddle. You don't know which way to go next, and you know that crisis has come and both are heartbreaking. If there was a sequel, if there was a chapter 2 to that story, could you tell that?
I don't have one.
You don't have one?
Because you know it's going to be heartbreak.
Oh.
But you also know that this life is full of highs and lows, and we are all subject to it. It's a Gaussian distribution, the good, the bad, the sort of in between. To participate joyfully in the sorrows of life.
Wow. Wow.
Yes, there's a sequel.
Yeah.
All of these stories have a sequel. And that's what you as storytellers must do.
It's a puzzlement to an extent, but it's not abstract, and that's the beauty of it, because even though the ending may be a little bit different or a surprise or leave you hanging, the part of it is that the engagement of the story in you is the reality, is the experience. And it's where things begin to percolate and where things become different. I have a thought that's crossed my mind as we've been talking, and I want to make another pitch. There is a group of storytellers nationally called the Healing Storytelling Alliance. And if you Google Healing Storytelling Alliance or healingstory.org, you'll get their website. And if you're interested in learning more or knowing more about the application of stories as a healing art, healing process, verbal balm maybe, there's a wonderful resource there. Over the years, they have a number of conference calls with various members of that group talking about things that are very much in line with what Claire has brought us today. And I commend that to you, and you can get a hold of me via our website, storycircle@proctors.org. But it's been a very wonderful time listening to your stories and feeling the seed kernels in all of them for both other stories and for healing moments, for loving moments, for adventuresome moments. Just been a great bit of time. Do you have any final little comments, observations?
I've had a great time here today, and I hope lots of people go and tell stories and listen well. In fact, I will task everyone who looks at this to tell a story. And it can be a story about themselves, it can be a story of what they did yesterday, and embroider it a little bit.
Embroider it a little bit.
Embroider
I love that turn of phrase.
Make it exciting, put mystery into it, and adventure.
Well, I think that would be. We usually don't assign homework on this show, but we certainly don't want it to be like homework. But if you want to try that on with an audience, remember that we're here at the Colonie Library on the 3rd Tuesday of November. So if you're hearing this and want to show up, we would love to see you. And a little open telling and fellowship, which we enjoy very much. What we need to say right now is thank you for watching, for being with us, and we look for you next month at Story by Story.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.